I know my future is, but it'll never be our past. Even just to turn your world, will never ever change the past. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's GVN Live. Today we're talking about MMOs and all of their glory. I was talking with these guys a couple of weeks ago about this, and I know that me and Mark have had a talk about MMOs before on one of his podcasts that he used to run. But honestly, I think a lot of this started, I think you guys were, Mark, you and Dr. Dog were having a conversation about which one you actually like better. I think it was like Final Fantasy 11 versus Final Fantasy 14.
Right.
And so I kind of was just like, we should just talk about MMOs in general, because I know that there's a lot of people that we all know in general. We hang out with a lot of people because of Final Fantasy 14. But it would be kind of nice to get a little bit more in depth with sort of what got you guys into MMOs in the first place, and sort of like how you guys sort of pushed into the genre, and what games you guys played, and sort of a little bit more of the nitty gritty of that. I think that kind of stuff is sort of like my bread and butter. Like MMOs and me, we've been together since the early 90s, so it's like kind of just my thing. But at the same time, there's obviously other stuff that, you know, you guys have probably played that maybe I haven't, and maybe stuff that I've played that you haven't, and it's always good to sort of just understand sort of where everything comes from, and sort of like where you got your roots in the MMO world.
Who wants to go first on that regard?
Like, I mean, if we're just talking about, like, our experiences with MMOs, the first one I played way back in the day was Ultima Online, like, a couple of months after it came out. But I've played a lot of them over the years. God. Ultima Online, Earth and Beyond, Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 14, Maple Story, Ragnarok Online, Asheron's Call, EverQuest, blah 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 blah.
Sure.
Just a lot of them. The only ones I've ever been able to really commit to any real degree are Ragnarok Online, Final Fantasy 11, and Final Fantasy 14. But I've spent time with a bunch of them over the years.
Mm-hmm.
MMOs is a genre very, very hit or miss for me. If I have a group of people that I know and that I like playing with, they're usually quite a lot of fun. Playing with strangers is always kind of for me, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Hubs?
I would say, for me, the first MMO I can recall playing was... That's actually kind of hard, because I do know that back in the day, I didn't really start playing MMOs until the early 2000s, because at that time, I think my first major game I played online was Diablo 2, Phantasy Star Online, and I guess you could say that was the opening gateway for it. Games like World of Warcraft and EverQuest 2 I did not get into, mainly because I was a broke little boy at the time who didn't afford online subscriptions. So I would guess maybe the first one I ever played was the original Guild Wars. You just buy the game, you hop in, and you play. I really enjoyed that. I think that was the first, massive, like, online multiplayer game I've played, and after that I went on a quest to find more free-to-play MMOs, and that's where I discovered Area Games and G Potato and other of their ilk, and I was playing games like Rapples or Last Chaos or Shia and a bunch of other games like that, free-to-play, minimalist, like nothing amazing in terms of like MMOs compared to what was being delivered at the time from games that were coming out in the mid-2000s, when World of Warcraft hit, when Warhammer hit, stuff like that. I was kind of like Mark in the sense that, like, playing with strangers, so I ended up playing solo in a lot of my MMOs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get down to it, I actually have soloed a lot in my MMOs, and it just seems like in some of these other MMOs. They're not very solo friendly. The ones that came out like in the 2000s. It wasn't until games like Terra, Star Trek Online, Neverwinter, those ilk,
Sure.
they had a very like solo friendly centric style of play, and I've been massively dedicated to games like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because of the gameplay, but because of just the way it caters to me as a guy who just wants to go out and play the game, and then I have the option of just interacting with a bunch of randoms. So, I enjoyed MMOs, and I played a ton of them. Probably not nearly as much as you, but
So MMOs are kind of like they're kind of like my bread and butter. They're like the games that I've played the most of in like just in general in gaming. I sort of moved from MMOs to fighting games around the time of Soul Calibur 2, but then I kind of like went back because at the time I was just out of high school, so I was like really young and I had no money, which means I had no real way to drive around a lot. So I just didn't go out as much as I wanted to when we came to the fighting stuff, and then eventually just went back to MMOs. I started back in the early like mid 90s. I'd gotten a chance to actually play Meridian Tift 9, but it wasn't like something I was really hardcore into. I played that probably for maybe a couple of weeks. I did play a little bit of Ultima Online when it came out in 97, but 99 was really when I kind of like slammed my head first in MMOs with EverQuest 1. I played that from pretty much launch up until right around the time World of Warcraft came out, Final Fantasy 11 came out. I ended up also on a massive stint with the original Phantasy Star Online on Dreamcast. About 6 to 8 months into playing EverQuest, I dropped it for like 3 months because I was just hard into PSO. But in that time, I've played other games like I helped to launch Anarchy Online, which was a terrible failure. I did dink around a little bit with Asheron's Call, which is also one of the very first games that actually had in-game player housing. I played Final Fantasy XI, Ragnarok Online, EverQuest, EverQuest 2, MapleStory. The list goes on. I've played a ton of games. A lot of it also comes down to the fact that because of the fact that the game itself was really playing to my extroverted nature, like I love talking to people. It's part of the reason why like I like working in call centers. But I enjoy being able to involve myself with other people and put myself into these situations where I'm able to group up with these other people. In games like EverQuest and like earlier MMOs from I'd say 95 to up until about when World of Warcraft came out, right around 04. MMOs were tough because you had to play with other people. Soloing in those games, like you said, it wasn't friendly. It was a really difficult experience for solo players because the games themselves were based around the idea of playing with other people. And a lot of it was because at the time, those games were really pushing the idea of fully graphical MUD, which if most people don't know what that means multi-user dungeon. MUDs were basically the original MMOs. They were built for text-based dial-up internet. They were, sort of like choose-your-own-adventure games that you had to have imagination, know exactly what you looked like, but they could host, dozens of people at a time to a point where you were still playing with other people, but you had to play with other people, because if you tried to solo in those, if you were starting off and you were soloing, you get your butt kicked. So a lot of these games, when they started coming out, they were graphical, they were 3D and 2D, but they required that you played with a lot of people, especially in games like Final Fantasy XI. Man, you had to group with people in the original iterations of 11. Same thing with EverQuest. EverQuest soloing was something you did up until you hit like Butcher Block, and then or you ended up having to go into the Null Den just outside of Quenos, and at that point it was like, what am I gonna do? I had to group with people because if I wanted to get camps, if I wanted to get kills, the mobs that were in those dungeons, even though they weren't instanced at the time, those mobs hit like trucks, and so if you tried to go in and solo those, you were going to die every single time. That's just how it worked. as I sort of started seeing the genre itself started getting to a point where as we hit around 03, 04, right around the time where World of Warcraft came out, City of Heroes came out. That was a huge genre-breaking game because it was the first time that anybody had tried to do a superhero MMO, and it was easily the most popular until they took it down in 2012. The other thing that's also interesting too is that a lot of the games that I noticed when I first really started getting into MMOs were the fantasy genre was the genre to beat. And not a lot of the MMOs really had the ability to topple fantasy. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that...
Oh, sorry.
Well, a lot of it had to do with the fact that fantasy was like the genre to go to because that was what everyone was interested in playing at the time. And that anytime a sci-fi or futuristic style MMO came out, it got destroyed. Like, it just didn't stand a chance. The games were either unpolished or they came out half-assed and they just failed and they fell flat on their face. So that was really something that that was a big reason why, like, when I started playing Phantasy Star Online on Dreamcast, that was when I really was like, this is a game that I actually like. It's sci-fi and it does really, really well. So for me, it was like, I don't know, I had this real interesting point where that was really when I started realizing, like, early 2000 going into WoW and going into 11, that was when I sort of like understood that, okay, there is a place for it. It's just a matter of where and how, and you know, the timing has to be really, really well put together. Otherwise, the game itself is just going to fall flat on its ass.
Mm-hmm. I do want to mention that even though you said the fantasy genre of MMORPGs is the most popular one, I do want to say that it seems like that there was tons of missed opportunities in terms of like the types of MMORPGs that could have come out back when, you know, MMOs first started to gain traction in the late 90s and the early 2000s, you know, with EverQuest. Like, one of the first ones I'd like to point out is the Lord of the Rings and the Tolkien universe. Could have been easily adapted back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, yeah, sure, it might look like an eyesore now, but the fact that whole universe right there was just ready for the picking, and nobody really wanted to jump on it and capitalize on it, or even thought so much about it until after the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies, you know, became such a huge success. That like you could have easily have had a competitor to Evercrack and WoW back then. Even you can even say, like, let's say the Narnia or tons of Chinese mythology, Asian myth or Oriental mythology, but that stuff didn't really start popping up until, you know, people started bringing over a lot of the Korean MMOs, which were more heavily based on, you know, their own mythology, and some of it, you know, didn't take off because, you know, we just didn't quite get what was going on because of, you know, translation and whatnot.
I think in that line too, there was a few that were like, we didn't really see the boom of a lot of the anime style MMORPGs until right around the early 2000s. Gekiju Online, Grand Chase, Maple Story, those were the ones that really started defining not just the quote unquote anime genre, but the overseas MMOs that we really all started seeing, to a point where it was like, oh, hey, this is popular. This has a lot of players, especially in games like Maple Story. Maple Story is probably one of the biggest 2D MMOs on the market.
OG Ragnarok as well.
OG Ragnarok Online, yes, but it sort of, a lot of its player base sort of left when Gravity basically said, hey, we don't care about you anymore, and everyone's like, we don't care about you anymore, and so everyone kind of went their separate ways.
What about you, Mark? You a fan of the fantasy MMOs?
No, but to be fair, I'm not necessarily a fan of the sci-fi MMOs either. Though I will say that outside of Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV, the game that I spent the most time with was Earth and Beyond. because like what it did was interesting and unique, and as science fiction games went, it was pretty novel in a lot of respects.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, it's not really a genre thing necessarily so much as it is a mechanics and structure thing. I devoted a decent amount of time to other MMORPGs, but never anything beyond like, the first 30 levels, I would say, just because like they only go so far, they only do so much for me as a player. So, I did some stuff with Guild Wars, and that was fine genre-wise, but mechanically it was, not anything really amazing. EverQuest was fine genre-wise, but at the time that it came out, it was, camp in a fucking field for 20 levels and then attempt to negotiate like 12 different zones where if you die, you're just fucked forever. And like your body leaves behind all of its shit. So not the best experience, but genre didn't have anything to do with it. It's just like, for me, it's mechanics and player base are always going to be the biggest thing, regardless of genre, which is why I never really invested time in all but like a few MMOs, never invested significant time, I should say, in all but a few MMOs, because either mechanically they didn't really hook me, or I just couldn't find a player base. Because like no matter how interesting a game is, if you can't find people to play with, or the people that you find are all dicks, you're not going to hang around there unless you too are a piece of shit.
Well, yeah. So that brings me to another question. What do you guys think really is what drives an MMO to still be able to stay afloat? Because as of right now, it is 2018, and games that were created back in the early and mid 90s, such as Meridian 59, RuneScape, Ultima Online, the original EverQuest, these games are still going. They haven't shut down their servers yet. And then yet you still have other games such as Asheron's Call that actually just went down at the end of January of last year. So it was still going. It still had a player base up until the end of the very beginning of 2017. So it's interesting to see that some of these games still have a massive player base, and by massive I mean obviously more than like a couple 100,000 players. Still worth keeping those servers on to let people still play those games. What do you guys think really helps keep that longevity going?
Investment.
Familiarity.
Well, it's not even necessarily familiarity, because like that's part of it for sure, but it's so long as the game doesn't actively go out of its way to piss off the player base, people will continue playing a game that generates new content and gives them some type of thing that they can hold up to showcase their achievements practically forever. I mean, just as an example, why do we keep coming back to Final Fantasy XIV? Because we've put hundreds of hours into it, because our characters are, level a gajillion, and they have like extremely high level gear, and they show basically the accomplishments that we have made over the time that we've made it. The houses that we make show off our accomplishments. The mounts that we get show off our accomplishments. The minions, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah,
the titles, and it's all of these things are a culmination of the investment that we put into the game and the experiences that we've had. All of these other games are that. Final Fantasy XI, if you've invested 6 real-time months of your life into that game, you're going to keep coming back to it because you invested all that time, and you can see this character and you can say, wow, I got all of this out of it.
I did
generally speaking. Yeah, like generally speaking, unless the game actively goes out of its way to piss you off or real life removes you from the game, you're probably going to hang out with it for as long as the game stays interesting. And if you invest money and you invest time into a game, it's probably going to stay more interesting than the bigger games, or than like a single player experience or another game. And like that's the key thing to keep in mind is that when you're competing with one of those games, you are competing with every achievement that person has ever made. So it's, if you aren't first or best, you're gonna have a hard time wrenching people away from the games that they've already invested shitloads of time and money into.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I feel it's also a factor of just like, not just what you get out of it in terms of like your investment, but just like the sense of, because all these games that you named, their communities have like definitely shrank significantly throughout the years, obviously, to the point where it's now a small, personalized, group of people who are familiar with one another, and they keep, the community alive. Look at a game like Phantasy Star Online Blueburst. That game has been offline since 2008, and people have private servers running for that game, and there's always at least a couple thousand people online playing that game at any given time across, the 4 private servers that are being ran by Ultima or Shitserve or whoever. And a lot of these people know each other. They're very personable with one another. They just have a great time. And if you decide to leave that game and go to another game, like let's say you go from PSO to Warhammer Online, you might not have the same type of experience or camaraderie or anything like that. You have to like start from scratch, and that's one thing I think that has kept a lot of these games like going and keeping their servers up and running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of it is the community. Like, so I played EverQuest for 13 years, but for about 10 of it I was actively playing, and so about 2 to 3 years after that, it was mostly I was just logging in to talk to my friends. Like, I almost did nothing in the game at that point because I was so bored with it and wanted something else to do. And then at that point it was like, okay, well, I'll go play this or I'll go play that, or that was really sort of how it happened for me. It was all around that same time. But then you've got other games that they have staying power because of other things too. There's something to be said about how combat in an MMO actually functions and helps to keep the actual games afloat beyond just like the initial draw of the gameplay, as far as how it looks and the community. And a lot of these games have a real unique way of how they look. I mean, you could put 14 and WoW next to each other and you can tell that WoW is super dated because it's got an older, more cartoony style, which was stylized when it first came out anyway, but still looked kind of different in comparison. Like, if I was going to make a better comparison, games that came out around the same time, WoW and 11. WoW had this much more cartoony style, whereas 11 had this more realistic style to their characters, where they felt more clean and they felt more alive in the fact that they were more streamlined as characters, whereas the characters that were in WoW were more cartoony and they had a lot more over-defined features in certain areas. The fact that female Night Elves bounce is totally out of the question. But then you've got other games that come in later on in certain games' lifespans. So you were mentioning Warhammer. Warhammer Online came out in 2008. Its servers shut down in 2013. So some of these games that have massive franchises behind them, I mean, especially from a company, say, I don't know, Games Workshop, you'd think they'd be able to put a ton of money into that game to keep it afloat as long as possible, and sometimes that just doesn't happen, as is evident with that. But then you've got another game such as City of. City of had a huge fan base of close to 1 million players for pretty much the entire lifespan of the game when it first came out back in 2004. But NCSoft just said, nope, don't want to deal with it anymore, and shut it down in 2012, much to the chagrin of a lot of the player base. There were still hundreds of thousands of people playing City of on a daily basis. When it first got announced that they were closing it down, a ton of those people were like, we don't want this. And so 11 was like, we have to figure out how to reverse engineer it. We want to do private servers, this, that, and the other. There was some offshoot employees from NCSoft who left to create their own game studio to make their own superhero genre video game. Champions Online came out a little bit after that, and people were like, well, this is good, but it's not the best replacement because we don't get quite as much leeway because it feels more like a traditional MMO versus the playstyle based MMO that City of was. And it was right around that, I think it was right around 06 or so is when you really start to see a lot of MMOs they all start to get to this weird place where you just start seeing dozens of new MMOs coming out of the woodworks that a lot of people never really thought would do very well, but still have fairly large groups of people playing it on a regular basis. So it's interesting to me because, like, games that you don't think would be good, or and again, that's subjective. But you get a game like Age of Conan, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's Conan! Oh, this is gonna do phenomenal!" And Funcom drops the ball.
Oh, they dropped it hard
but
from the
yet
moment the game came out.
But yet, it still has a player base.
It does,
and it's still going, which is shocking to me.
Well, that's just one of the few examples of like where a game, an MMORPG, was the ball was dropped on release, but then they managed to progressively make the game better. The most recent version of this is Elder Scrolls Online, and that has become one hell of a phenomenal game now at this point. And they just released their latest expansion, Somerset Isle, which I have yet to delve into, but still, it's one of those things where also Final Fantasy 14. There's another example right there. They fucked up hardcore with the vanilla version of the game to the point where they had to scrap it and redo the whole thing.
So, that being said, what do you guys think are some good things and some bad things about, like, just game mechanics, or just in general? Like, what do you guys think, like, the best trends in an MMO really, or what helped to keep it going? Like, what do you guys like about your MMOs that you do play or that you have played in the past that you liked that you maybe think would be better served in more games now? And what are some mechanics that you guys are thinking in games currently do you think would probably be something you could do without going forward?
Let's start with the stuff that I think that I could do without going forward. The strong emphasis on buying keys, for crates that you find in your games. Terra is a big proprietor of this. Pretty much anything from Cryptic Studios is a big... Not Cryptic Studios. The people that are... Huh?
Bluehole.
Yeah, Bluehole. These are the people who are responsible for, like, taking a bunch of games. This happens in Star Trek Online now. This also happens in Neverwinter. A lot of these, American MMORPGs. Guild Wars. Yeah, a bunch of these games now where it's not just you have an online shop for the game for stuff that give you EXP boosts, mounts, avatar clothes and stuff like that. No, now you have to like pay money for keys to buy these to open up these random crates that you get that are littered like all over the place. Like I think when I was playing Terra 3 nights ago, the last time I played, I think I picked up like 10 or 15 of these unlockable crates that I needed keys for, and I would be just fine if I could go forward and not have to see that ever again. Now, in regards to stuff I wish I had back when I started playing MMOs, the soloing aspect of games that I get from like the said Terra and Star Trek Online and Neverwinter, and just a bunch of the other MMOs that have coming out now that are just so solo friendly, but still give me that option to play, or group up with a bunch of random people. Because if that's one of the things I did eventually try to play WoW and Evercrack 2, or some of those other older MMOs, like I actually just tried to play Perfect World International. If I just had people who I could just play with, that I could, easily, team up with some random people, it would make the game so much easier to enjoy. or even or even make those games more solo friendly. Because I'll be truthfully honest, just traversing the world of World of Warcraft, that game is huge and it's boring compared to, I mean, you might disagree, but to me it's insanely huge. And I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with that, but just for my personal preference, I don't like giant games. I mean, I do like huge open worlds. I mean, I like my sandbox and my sandbox games, for single player experiences. But like, I feel as if you're trying to create a huge continuous world, I think you should, do it in a way that just doesn't make it so ludicrously huge and just that everything is so spaced out and you kind of get bored and lost, and you just lose all interest. That's just me though. Mark?
I'm trying to think of stuff that I would want to see brought into other games. The ability to do single-player stuff in MMOs is great. Like, I really do appreciate the way that 14, for example, makes it entirely viable to do lots of different stuff just on your own, so that you're getting the most out of your monthly subscription, even when your friends or your static or whatever aren't available. I'm trying to think of stuff that you could bring from MMOs into regular games, and I'm kind of drawing a blank. Just because, like, MMOs are such a different beast that I don't know that there's a lot of stuff genre-wise that would make the crossover particularly well. Stuff that I don't want to see anymore. I want to take the example Robert made and apply it to, like, the 14 stuff. I wish developers had a better concept of what the stuff that they were making in their cash shops was actually worth. Because a lot of these games exist in a way such that they survive because they get a small but devoted group of whales who will spend any amount of money to be the very best possible, and they don't actually work to be sustainable to their overall fan base. So when their overall fan base goes away, the whales eventually go away, and then they go out of business.
Yeah.
And it's like, for 14, this isn't as
what
much
happened? How did our money go away?
Well, a lot of companies know full well that this is a thing, and they just stack for that instead of attempting to cultivate a fan base that would pay a reasonable amount of money. And, like, in 14, for example, if you go on the cash shop for that, a game that we pay a monthly subscription fee for, keep in mind, all of the stuff there is a grotesquely large amount of money that I would literally never, ever pay for anything on there. Anything I own from the cash shop is only because it was on sale for like 75% off or something to that effect. There is no reason that amount that you fly around on should be $20 goddamn dollars. That is absurd.
Preach.
I don't.
Thanks, Well.
Yeah, like, it's ridiculous. That is an absurdly large amount of money to ask for anything. Especially something that's just a cosmetic item to fly me around on. Any of the stuff that they sell, with the exception of the level up potions and the story skip potions, are cosmetics. They're all cosmetic shit. Like, even the wedding is just like a simple event that you do that ultimately ends up getting you some cosmetics. There's no reason to charge the absurdly large amount of money that they do for that. The wedding might move a shitload of money, but you're only going to move this stuff to the couple of thousand whales that you have. And the millions of people that you have playing this game are never going to fucking spend money for this shit because it's grotesquely expensive. And it's if the stuff were even half the price that it is, just half the price that it is on a consistent basis, I guarantee you way more people would be buying it.
A couple of ideas just popped into my head. Something I would like to actually see also removed. Can we just get rid of the damn, like, alchemy crafting system? Because 90% of the... No, there are definitely some MMOs that use it to its fullest effect. But then you have those other games that, they have it in there just to have it in there. because it feels like it's part of the MMORPG checklist. Okay, so we got...
Does it have a crafting system? Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Is it good? No. Oh, well, I'm not playing it.
Exactly. Does it have a lot of these games do not have, some of them... Okay, some games have very extremely robust, complicated craft systems. Some have minuscule, like, brain-dead, like, craft systems. And others just, have some where you just press a button, and if you have, okay, this and that, congratulations, you have a 90% chance of crafting something.
So I think my biggest issue with crafting in certain games is that there's a difference between the US style of crafting and the Korean style of crafting.
The Korean style is a headache.
Oh,
I remember the first time I encountered the Korean crafting system when I played Aeon Online.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Aeon's crafting gross. A lot of people that know about, when I say Korean crafting, a lot of people really understand that from games like MapleStory, where or even in some cases Terra, the original Terra. K-Terra, before they brought it over to the States, had a crafting system that basically would allow you to shatter the items that you were currently working on if you failed a crafting, which means that this item that you had spent probably 8 to 10 hours to actually farm to get to drop, and then another 3 to 4 to actually boost it to its maximum possible stat value, only to have it shatter and lose everything. Not just the stuff that you used to craft to get it to that max level, but the item itself that you farmed all disappear from your inventory, removing your weapon from your character and not having a weapon anymore. That was the old style of Korean crafting. Now, a lot of those games don't do that anymore, or they don't have that risk of the actual item breaking and disappearing. They just have it now so that it goes down in value instead of going up or not doing anything at all. I know that PSO2 follows that same style of, it used to. Let me rephrase that. The PSO2 crafting
Before
system,
or after it went Sword Art Online on us?
Oh, no. Okay, we'll get into that later. Chapter 4 didn't happen. Nobody exists. Nobody actually says anything about Chapter 4. We don't talk about Chapter 4.
Nobody talks about Chapter 4 or 5.
4. 5 is the new one. It's really good.
Okay.
But 4 didn't happen. 4 is the one where they actually go into the real world, and the only reason they did it in the first place was specifically because they were pimping the
I haven't
actual
made
animation.
it all the way through 4 yet.
Good. It doesn't matter, because the second you start playing, it'll kick you into 5 anyway, so haha.
Okay.
But there are games like that that have that. So old school grinding and crafting in PSO2 used to be that if you failed, it would decrease a massive amount. So much so that you just wasted a ton of mats trying to get it from +7 to +8, and now all of a sudden it's +5 because it dropped 3 levels, and you just lost materials that cost 6 million of your base resource. Crafting is crafting, and I get it, and it works in most MMOs if it's done right. But that kind of crafting, the grindy crafting, it has its place, but it's only for those kinds of things. But then you come into these other kind of Korean games where you've got weird mechanics that are based around crafting your item in the first place. And if you don't have specific crafted items, you can't actually continue your character's storyline. So Grando Espada, Atlantica, Grand Chase did it, Elsword does it. There's certain things you have to craft these items in order for your character to actually go up into the next class. If you don't make the item, or you don't have the stuff to make the item, then you're limit crafted. You have to limit break, and if you can't limit break it, then
I think Black Desert does that as well.
BDO, only the original 3 classes. All of the newer classes don't have you do that anymore. The Valkyrie has a weird limit break system anyway, but all of the rest of the class, only the original 3 have that. All of the other expansion classes that have come out after the fact, you don't have to do that anymore. They got rid of that system. But if I'm really going to be honest about what I want in an MMO, what I want more in an MMO, this is coming from a place of absolute love and yet hate at the same time. I love the idea of Twitch-based gameplay. So this comes from a place of I used to play a ton of FPS games, and so I've always liked the idea of having FPS-based MMOs. But at the same time, I also understand that that's not entirely a very feasible way of being able to play MMOs in a grander scheme. So games like Terra, games like Guild Wars, games like...
Well, Guild Wars is like a mesh between, like traditional MMO
I'm talking
and...
about just stuff that's manual aim. So Guild Wars has manual aim. If you're not aiming directly towards the thing that you're trying to fight, even though it's more turn-based, role-based combat, like most traditional MMOs, if you're not looking directly at it with your reticle, you're still not going to hit it. Other games like...
Maybe in certain aspects of Guild Wars 2, but I don't remember that in Guild Wars 1.
No, Guild Wars 1 was a straight traditional MMO.
Yeah.
I'm talking more like 2. There's another one I was thinking of, too, that was Dragon Nest. Dragon Nest is it's a 3D free-to-play from Korea, but it's also manual aim. The other thing that I really like, and this is something that I think should be done a little bit differently, but could still be really popular if you did it right, is tactics-based tactical combat, where it's turn-based. Even though it's still an MMO, so you still have the ability to play like a normal MMO with other people, but when you get into combat, it's turn-based, and it's tactical. So you have a grid, and you have to move your dude around to where the enemies are, and then you fight them. But you are still in a party, so you still have the ability to have other people in your team, like, really build the tactics for boss fights and stuff like that. And I think that's something that could be done, maybe not in like a grander scale, but is definitely something that I would like to see be a little bit more... I don't know. I think I would like to see people push boundaries a little bit more with that kind of combat, tactical combat, or even turn-based combat, so that, especially if you're in a party, I'm not the only one that's trying to figure out how to do this fight. And if it comes down to it, I've got myself, and then I've got everyone else in my party that also have the ability to actually be more tactical based and be more turn based to actually get where that kind of stuff is at. So games like Dofus, Atlantica, those kind of games where you've got that turn-based sort of strategy-style gameplay, I think, while it has its place, could still be really well done if you put it into a bit more of a... put it into a game, or put it into a world where people could actually enjoy the storyline of the game and have a tactical style of combat, not slow down that pace.
I want to just give an honorable mention, just to break it up. Probably the first rock star of, the MMO world, Lord British himself, and his contributions with Ultima Online, and, of course, to lesser extent, the short-lived and somewhat overlooked Tabula Rasa.
Mm-hmm.
So, I thought that might be something you'd want to take a quick crack at.
Nah, fuck Richard Garriott.
Not a fan.
Not a fan. I'm not a fan.
Oh, I understand you're not a fan, but...
He's okay, but he's one of those people who... Everything about him lived and died in the 80s and 90s. Like, Richard Garriott now, his shit was decidedly a product of that time period to the exclusion of all else. And... he made Ultima, but let's be honest, Ultima Online is notable because it was like the first major MMO. It wasn't the first. It was the first major MMO. Otherwise, it was shit.
Ultima Online was good because of the fact that it helped bring MMOs to the limelight. It brought it to the forefront so that people knew what MMOs were and what they were all about. But outside of that, let's be honest, if you were to try to play anything like that right now, like there are two different types of people that actually play games like Ultima Online and RuneScape. There are people who play those games because they still genuinely enjoy those games, and then there's the people who like to automatically emote their character bending over in front of other people's crotches. That's pretty much the entirety of both of those games now.
Right. It's going to be like 20% people who are legitimately dedicated to that experience and 80% assholes.
Mhm.
And it's listen. If I wanted to get that experience, I'd go play Ark.
Oh, fair. Or Conan Exiles, whichever.
Yeah, or Conan Exiles. If I wanted to hate myself today, I'd go play Conan Exiles.
Or we just wait a few more months and play the Vault 76, which is practically Conan, post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, or Vault 76.
Oh,
Yeah.
Fallout 7.
Ugh,
Yeah, Fallout
fuck that fucking thing. Jesus Christ.
Hey, I'm down for it. You're gonna play, Mark.
Fuck you.
You don't know
That's
it, but
not
your
happening.
copy's in the mail.
That's not happening.
You're
That's
not my
happening.
real dad.
You're not my real dad.
You don't know that, son.
Oh.
Bitch, I'm older than you.
Creates a time paradox now, doesn't it?
Oh, Snake. So, my last question that I have for you guys then are, obviously, when it comes to MMOs, you have a very simple, idea of what an MMO really is, right? You're used to playing it on a computer, keyboard and mouse. You have a row of numbered buttons, each of them that do specific things. And as you are going through it, you gain more buttons to put on those bars, and that's basically how you play the game. But in that vein, there were some games that were genre-defining games that weren't actually released on computers. There were a small number of console-based MMOs, such as Phantasy Star Online, and to a lesser extent, games like EDF, that really were pushing the boundaries of not just what consoles could do at the time, but also helped to define a subgenre of MMOs. And a lot of people don't really know about a lot of it, but I mean, obviously the three of us do because we play it, but games like Monster Hunter and games like Diablo and the ARPG genre, a lot of these games probably would be in a different light, or even in a different sort of just weird subsect of gaming in general, had it not really been for people's need and want to play games that were like this, like MMOs in general, with more people. Honestly, I think that games like that tended to really help to sort of understand that, like, hey, this is a thing, that this is a new kind of game that we're all going to start playing, and we didn't realize that we were going to even play this kind of things. So
I don't know about DC Online coming out to consoles first. I think it was a port. Like, it came out on PC first, and then 2 years later it came out on consoles.
So DC Universe Online originally launched on Windows and PlayStation 3 in January of 2011. So it was not the first console MMO. The first console MMO technically could be attributed to Phantasy Star Online.
Well, that was more of like a Diablo-esque type of game. If my opinion,
No,
in my opinion,
like,
I would
so-
say Final Fantasy 11 would be the first.
It depends on to what extent you qualify MMORPG as a thing.
Mhm.
Phantasy Star Online was mostly multiplayer. It was online, and it was a role-playing game. The fact that it crossbreeds with stuff like Diablo, or more recently, the hunting action genre, doesn't necessarily remove the fact that it qualifies as an MMO. If
Right.
you want to talk about pure MMOs, like the games that fall fully into the sort of genre that Ultima Online and EverQuest created, Final
Mhm.
Fantasy XI is probably the first.
But then doesn't that mean we
Although-
enter territory where we call Diablo
that's not-
MMO?
No.
Mm-mm. So I mean, if we're really looking at the time frames for when everything came out, PSO on Dreamcast was the very first console-based MMORPG, followed by Final Fantasy XI for the PS2, EverQuest Online Adventures also on the PS2, which was also contributed as the first console MMORPG in North America. Because remember, PSO came out in Japan before it came out in the States. as did 11, because we didn't in the States get 11 until 2 years after it had come out in Japan. So we actually saw that in the States, EQ Online Adventures was the first console MMO, whereas technically the very first console MMO was PSO. Obviously, there are more console MMOs or more ports of MMOs coming to consoles, especially with Final Fantasy XIV still being on PS4. But that is still sort of how it worked out. The same thing could also be said about, especially with like the popularization of Facebook and microtransactions, because let's be honest, that's a thing that happens in a lot of MMOs now. You also now have a large cadre of browser-based MMOs. So games like Adventure Quest and Free War. A lot of these games became popular because MMOs as a genre existed. Same thing with like smartphone MMOs. Like, I guess you could technically smartphone-based MMOs are weird because they're not really MMOs so much as they're more just AR games that just happen to have some semblance of gatherings.
Though.
Well, so if we're really going to look at the genre from the right angle, I would say more along the lines of games like Ingress and Pokemon Go.
I can probably go along with that.
So I think a lot of this is also just has to speak to, and this is kind of like my final point, is that MMOs as a genre helped to define a subsect of other games that all came out after the fact, that came out down the line, that had some of these MMOs, these big defining MMOs like Meridian, which led to Ultima, which led to EverQuest, which led to WoW. Because let's be honest, if you're gonna say three big MMOs that people probably know, you're gonna say Ultima Online, EverQuest, and World of Warcraft. Those are the three big MMOs that everyone's going to remember, even if they never actually played them or only played one of them. You're still going to know that these MMOs exist because of the fact that each one previous was the one that led to the next one. There were people who were players during Ultima Online who then became GMs as they worked for Sony and played EverQuest, who then left Sony to help develop World of Warcraft at Blizzard. So it was just a natural progression from player to employee to creator. It just sort of happened. And you can see where a lot of these games started to sort of push into the next game and push into the next game, and they started grabbing more information from both the player base and the developers to make the next one. You've got these increasingly more complex style of gameplay with games like Ultima, where everything was open world, and EverQuest, which was also open world, even though there were dungeons, they weren't the way that we would consider them to be dungeons now in current MMOs, which led to instance dungeons, which is something that was originally sort of integrated in World of Warcraft. And then around the time that they announced instance dungeons in WoW in like 2003, they started implementing them into EverQuest with an expansion called Lost Dungeons of Norath. Games like Anarchy Online, Lord of the Rings, EQ, EQ2, Ion, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars, all of these other games, they all started using instance dungeons, and now that's just a staple. Every MMO that's an MMO is an MMO because it has instance dungeons. So a lot of these things really come down to, I think that, and this is just a subjective point of view for me, had it not been for the consistent need to push the boundaries of what multiplayer gaming online was all about, I don't know that the MMO genre could have picked up as much as it did had it not been for simpler, more baseline games like Ultima, like I'm trying to think of some of the other games that were around that time frame. If it had it not been for games like Meridian, RuneScape, Ultima Online, Lineage, and EverQuest, we probably wouldn't be seeing MMOs as a genre today in the same light.
Yeah, those games definitely had like heavy influences on companies to go forth and give us the type of games that we have now. Like if Lineage didn't catch on, we wouldn't have 3 more Lineage games. We have one on the cell phones now. We have Lineage 2, Lineage 3 is on the way. EverQuest. If that didn't blow up the way it did, we probably wouldn't have had WoW.
I mean, considering the fact that a lot of the player base from EQ moved over to help develop WoW, you're probably right. Had they not had all of the gripes and complaints of what Sony was doing with EQ at the time, they probably never would have left to make WoW in the first place.
Speaking of EverQuest, let's be a little respectful here. I'm actually very disappointed to see that the latest EverQuest game has really been having all kinds of developmental issues, like the world creation portion of the game that they were supposed to release like a year or two ago.
Oh, hun, aren't you in the know? It got canceled in 2016.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was just saying it got canceled. Like
Yeah,
they had that.
Next had a thing. So they actually released their world building sandbox version for general public in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
It's Landmark is what it was called. Landmark had a lot of problems, like a lot of problems, and the problem, I attribute it to two things. One, the game itself, Landmark itself, came out at a really bad time because it was also coming out around the same time as the big boom, and I mean boom, in the survival genre. So games like Ark and Rust and 7 Days to Die and Minecraft and all of these survival builder games all had huge online presences with their own communities at the same time that Landfall was coming out. And Landfall came out and it looked ass-tastic. It looked horrible. It basically took the EverQuest 2 engine and slapped on a 720p coat of paint. And that was all they can manage. And they're like, here's all these things, and here's how you build, and here's how you put stuff together. Only it's basically Fortnite without the shooting. And it was bad. It was really bad. And a lot of people complained about it. They're like, this is ass. This is shit. We don't want this. This is not what we expected it would to be. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, pay us a small amount of money to help fund Next, and whatever you build in Landmark, it was basically a land rush. So each server had the ability to have people go to specific locations and throw down their buildings on a plot of land. And when Next was supposed to go live, that plot of land would be that player-owned section of land. They had never planned to actually create their own cities or implement their own NPCs. The players were supposed to do all of it.
The work for them, huh? And the players were like, fuck that.
Exactly. And so when they started sieving people out and they're like, oh, wait, we can keep it. Nope. The holes were just too big at that point. And the people that were die hard, we love this, registered in maybe the low thousands.
Yeah.
That's
at that
not even
point, it almost sounds
enough.
like it was trying to become a virtual real estate type of game, akin to what's probably, just say right now, the biggest MMO game of all time, Second Life. And people seem to forget about that game even existing. Yeah, I know.
It's not technically an RPG.
Well, see, that's the thing, though.
It's an MMO.
It's MMO is a name or a terminology can be used for any type of game. I mean, you could say the same thing about Destiny. Destiny, in its right, is an MMO game, but it is an MMO FPS, not an MMORPG. But that's a totally different topic.
Totally different topic.
Games. So there are 3 games that I can say that are either successors or updated games that I wanted to actually see happen. I still want to see Lineage 3 happen because I really do want that to not suck, even though I am still...
I forget, is Lineage 3 changing the camera perspective? It's a third-person perspective? Or three-quarter perspective?
It's isometric.
Isometric. I keep forgetting the proper terminology for that.
Yeah, so I want to see Lineage 3 not suck, but I'm also on the fence because NCSoft and me do not have the best relationship. I want to see Identity not suck, but it's in such a weird limbo that no one knows what's going to happen with it at this point. And I'm not entirely sure what's really going to happen with it, but as it is right now, I really do kind of want to see Camelot Unchanged, or I'm sorry, Camelot Unchained not fail either. The idea behind what they did with Dark Age of Camelot was not terrible. It was just implemented in a weird time, and it ended up getting blown out of the water by EverQuest. But for those of you who don't know, Camelot Unchained is actually a partially funded Kickstarter game from the former designer of Dark Age of Camelot. I think they got, 4.6 million for it? So we'll see. I don't know. I really want those three to actually do good, because those are these are all going to be next gen. At least one of them is going to be sandbox. That's actually probably not going to suck this time. And we'll see. I think that as much as I would like to say that Stellar Dawn had a chance, we already know that it didn't, because let's just be honest, Jagex sucks at anything they've touched. The only game that's ever done anything for them at all has been RuneScape, and the only reason that still goes is because the player base keeps the game alive, not them. And I mean, EverQuest is EverQuest, and Sony did what they could with the original. EQ2 was absolutely ass-tastic, and Next was doomed to fail from the start. I don't care what anyone says.
You know, in regards to the comment about Dark Age of Camelot and its supposed Kickstarter sequel or whatever, that and Warhammer had this thing that I really enjoyed, and I think most MMORPGs nowadays that have a huge PvP factor into it should allow this. It's the realm versus realm thing that combat that they had going on. I really enjoyed that aspect a lot. It was probably the only time I ever really got into PvP when it came to MMORPGs, and it wasn't just also the realm versus realm where you siege several points on a map to try and gain control for bonuses and whatnot while you're warring against another faction. You also had these really interesting little areas where it's PvE. It was kind of like a PvE zone where you fought with the elements, and then you fought other people to attain kind of like a realm versus realm where you try to gain that area. Adult content. Yeah, sure, whatever. But I think that's probably something that I would like to see more of for future MMOs, especially if they bring back, Camelot.
I don't know. I'm interested. Outside of that, I don't know. There are a couple of other MMOs that are supposed to be coming out, or that were launched recently that I don't really have a lot of. I mean, I want to see them do well because they're next gen and they don't look terrible. But I've also tried them a little bit, and I'm like, I guess we'll have to see how it develops. And that's Skyforge and Albion. Skyforge has an interesting idea because it's manual aim, and I have a real soft spot in my heart for manual aim.
I have no problem with that. Yeah, it's an action MMORPG, but
Albion, I want to see it not fail, but at the same time, I know it's going to, which sucks.
I have to refresh my memory what Albion is.
Albion Online. So Albion Online, it's MMORPG that was developed by Sandbox, which is a studio based out of Berlin. They basically funded the game based on founder packs, and now they just have a premium currency. The problem is that this is basically what we were talking about before. The game itself is basically Whale, the MMO. It's got a really interesting set of gameplay mechanics, but unless you're willing to pay a ton of money, to play this game, you're not going to play it because you got to spend a lot of money to get the starter packs and the booster packs to make your character and everything really worthwhile for you.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see about that. So where do we go from here in regards to MMOs?
Sandboxing and mixing a genre between standard MMO fare and world building, I think is really where it's headed, honestly. Because I think that's really where a lot of people want to see the genre go, to make it more player-centric, but still have content made by the companies themselves for the actual gameplay. So you build your own community locally through your own creation, and then after that you've got the actual game content that you and your newfound friends go out to actually conquer. I think that's where the genre needs to head. Otherwise it's just going to keep being the same stale sort of everything is crafted. And while I appreciate a good story, a la 14 and the Old Republic, I still want to be able to have some semblance of consistency in sort of how I actually create my own personal experience outside of the crafted experience, such as games like Arcade and WildStar.
So, Mark, what are your thoughts about what you think will come in the future of MMOs?
I think we're probably going to see something where traditional RPGs start sort of leaning into the idea of utilizing what MMOs have done to various points. Like, we're kind of sort of starting to see games that are attempting to utilize RPG style mechanics onto MMO games that aren't necessarily MMOs. Again, Destiny and Destiny 2 attempting to be MMO experiences that have some RPG veneer associated with them while ostensibly being first-person shooters. You know, Warframe. Games that are heavily connected online and have the MMO elements but don't necessarily have all of the RPG stuff that we expect. I would sort of expect that we're going to see those sorts of games kind of become the base building block for whatever the next MMORPGs are, and we'll probably start seeing games where like the single player and the multiplayer go hand in hand with one another more so. I think that games like WoW and Final Fantasy XIV are probably going to be among the last of the traditional MMORPGs as we understand them, and more games are going to start trying to be hybrids in some capacity or another, just because I don't necessarily think that market is going to get any bigger than it is now, really, at this point. Like, you're going to see people who are going to be looking to see what's next rather than wanting to attach themselves to the stuff that's already been done.
Okay, so another big thing in regards to MMOs is the big shift in terms of their service. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, the big thing about MMORPGs is that they were a pay-to-play with a subscription-based service, and now it is free-to-play with in-game shops that have been overtaking the entire genre pretty much, with only a few games managing to still hold on to the subscription-based games. I mean, we've seen a ton of big profile games lately that have come out that were subscription based, and then they had to completely, like, after they started losing their fan base, they had to huddle up their team together, and then they had to completely redo everything in terms of how they can try and keep their their games alive. You've seen this with Elder Scrolls Online, WildStar. I think Aeon went free to play as well after its first 6 months. Terra went free to play within its first year, but they still give you the option to subscribe, and they give you benefits and goodies for doing that. So that's one thing that some people are still doing. But then you still have the other games. I mean, even Star Trek Online did it after its like first 2 years, and they even had people pay $99 for, or what was it, almost $1,000 for a lifetime subscription for that game. I bet they got their money's worth.
Yeah, a lot of those people actually got refunded, so that was fine.
That's good. That's good. But there's also, you got World of Warcraft that's still, you still have a subscription service too. I think actually there is only
the two. So World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah.
No, sorry,
And
there's
11.
three. And 11. So 11, 14, and WoW are the only three games where you must.
Isn't
both
Ultima
purchase
Online
the
still?
game.
I
No,
mean,
it's free to play.
no. Okay.
No, Ultima Online is free to play. So there's a distinction between the three genres. There's pay to play, there's free to play, and there's freemium. So the freemium ones are the ones where you can either get the game for free and then pay a monthly subscription cost if you wish, but you are not denied access to all of the content, only a little bit of like the hyper end game like Terra. Or there are free to play games which are pure free to play, and then they have a straight cash shop. These are the kinds of games now that I think the market has really shifted to, because those are the ones that tend to have the most player base outside of the big, the big two at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to really say, but I think in that case that having a free to play mentality is good, but it's also bad because it leads to bad market habits, like a cash shop that gives boosting. Where you can buy an experience pot and get to max level within a very short period of time.
Aria Games is extremely guilty of that.
Aria, Nexon, G-Potato, all of those companies. Every single one of them have freemium games that have pay-to-win mechanics.
Yep.
Pay-to-win is built to be used in one type of game, and it is not an MMO. I'm just saying, if you're going to pay to win, it's going to be in a game like Magic or Hearthstone. It is not supposed to be in an MMO. It does not help to the player base if people are trying to enjoy, say for instance, even in PvP, people are trying to enjoy PvP in a game and they have the ability to have somebody like instantly boost their character to 3 times their level with a specific potion that you get to use before you go into combat. That's not fun. Nobody wants that. And that's where a lot of these free to play games have really kind of hit their stride, is they're shooting for the whale, they're shooting for the stars, and eventually they'll get there, but they're still not going to meet the numbers that they're getting from the two big. The reason why these are the big two is because of the fact that they have pushed and pushed and pushed to make their content the absolute most polished and the best that they could possibly make it. And I think that was something that BioWare probably could have learned from their mistakes and really built upon when they started releasing some of the single player content that they did, which I thought was a great addition to the game. But the fact that you basically have to keep paying to get these additional content, like these additional story, chapters tacked onto your account. I could pay $30 for an expansion and unlock all 13 chapters, or I could pay $9.99 a chapter. What do you think I'd rather do? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
how do you how do you feel about
Rough.
the three pay scale systems or non-pay scale systems of the freemium, free to play, and pay to play, Mark? And its evolution.
Well, I mean, to me, it's freemium and free to play kind of sort of occupies similar space to a certain extent. Pay to play is still fine, but there's a reason why we're not doing it anymore, with the exception of a couple of games, because nobody wants to pay for these games. Nobody wants to pay to play anything but the small amount of games that are still presently charging a monthly fee.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to convince somebody in current year argument to pay for a game at this point.
I like the idea of what some companies do, where they produce a very polished, very clean, very nice piece of content, and you have to pay a small amount for it, say $20 or $30, but then there's no monthly fee involved with it. So all like Guild Wars, stuff like that, where I'll pay a little bit up front for the full game, and then I can play it all I want. And then if I want to, add little bits here and there, I can do so. But it's in generality still a free-to-play game. I just have a small paywall of buying the game up front. Outside of that, the idea of what a lot of these other free-to-play companies do is in the same line along, like, everyone knows who Nexon is. Everyone knows who Nexon is because that's MapleStory. But at the same time, a lot of people are like, this is where it should have gone. If WoW was free to play, everyone would play it. If 14 was free to play, everyone would play it. I don't agree with that. I think that the reason why these games are still pay to play is because they have this refined, polished, gorgeous additional piece of content that comes out because you pay that fee every month, because you're helping that game progress, and because they already provided a quality piece of content. You're willing to stay and play and pay for that content on a monthly basis. Whereas you get a lot of those other free-to-play games, that doesn't happen because the content is static, the content is redundant, or is just basically just palette swapping previous content from 6 months to a year ago.
Right. I mean, my thing at the end of the day is that if this game was worth paying money for on a monthly basis, you would be paying money for it on a monthly basis because this company would be paying you money, would be asking you to pay money for it on a monthly basis. I know people who played Operative Tenths there, Guild Wars 2 a lot, and play Operative Tenths, Final Fantasy 14, and like, if Guild Wars 2 were the best MMORPG, why wouldn't you keep playing that for free instead of playing Final Fantasy 14 at a cost? Like, there's no, like, you're still paying for the client either way. There's still an upfront cost to purchase the client client product to host it to allow you to play it. But there's an additional cost to 14. If these games are free month to month, why would these paid games exist? You know, and for me, it's like the Old Republic is now, you can play that free to play monthly. There's experience boosts for subbing, but you can play it free to play. If that game had been a success, they wouldn't have done that.
Well, you could say that about a lot of, games that started off as subscription based. I mean, some of these subscription based games actually started off successfully. I mean, Warhammer Online: Age of Reckoning had at its peak 800,000 subscribers when the game was at its most popular, and then 5 years later, Electronic Arts decided to axe the game because they couldn't get the user base above 500,000.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for that, but it ultimately comes down to you need to make a game that's going to be successful long term. Just because a game attracts a bunch of people in the beginning, because that's something that a lot of MMOs have done over the years. The Matrix Online attracted people pretty well in like its first year, and then crapped out because it couldn't hold on to them. If your game isn't any good, people aren't going to stick around with it. Final Fantasy 14 has a huge user base at this point in the multiple millions of people. World of Warcraft has a huge user base at this point in the multiple millions of people. Because these games are consistently good and take player input into account, and these games actively attempt to make themselves into experiences that people want to pay money for. Earth and Beyond, whether I liked it or not, didn't. City of Heroes, whether I liked it or not, eventually didn't. They could not make an experience that could hold on to players, whether it was because the developers weren't good, or the tech passed them by, or the mechanics passed them by, or whatever. At the end of the day, it just comes down to the developers could not make a product that people wanted to continue paying money for on a month-to-month basis. And that's my argument. If your game could convince people to pay money for it, you would be charging them money for it. Like, Guild Wars 2 did what it did, and that's fine, but they still have some type of cost-based mechanic associated to get money out of the game outside of the core payment associated. If they could charge a monthly subscription fee, they probably would. Because what they're doing now is just trying to circumvent the monthly subscription fee.
Yeah. I guess we're getting ready to go. I guess we're getting close to the end of the night, so I figured why don't we name off our 5 favorite MMORPGs. We could start with the people in the chat. And Jan, since you are, hosting the topic today, maybe you can share us your 5 favorite MMOs.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe even give us
so
a
many
little
that I
story as to why they're your favorites.
Okay, so if I'm gonna go down the line, so EQ is probably gonna be my number 5, mostly just because it's probably the game that I've spent the most time with. Short of WoW, obviously, but EQ is really my introduction to the genre, where I really kind of hammered down and said, this is the game that I'm going to play for a very long time, and I did. A lot of it was just because the people that I met, the experiences that I had as I grew up. I played this game out of high school, so I was at a point in my life where I really didn't have a lot of people around me, but a lot of the people that I had online were the people that I really got a chance to really connect with, and that was really a thing that really made me happy, and it really kept me going. I'd say that after that, obviously, we've got World of Warcraft, because that's also the one that I played the most outside of EverQuest. Again, the same reason. All of the people that I met, all of the different experiences that I had, from casually playing the game to hardcore rating, it really was just kind of a thing that just kept me going in the genre. Lineage 2, because it just, for me, Lineage 2 was just kind of one of those games where it kind of was a nice stopgap for me. It had a lot of the fantasy stuff that I wanted, but it also had a lot of the aspects of the combat that I wanted at the time. While I did play a lot of City of, and I do miss the character that I had in City of, because she was actually really fun. I probably would honorably mention that one. For number 2, goodness. Probably Final Fantasy 14. Mostly just because of after all the reworks after Vanilla and 1.0 went away, and they did Realm Reborn, and all that was really good. A lot of my friends that I have now are all still playing 14. I enjoy 14 because it's the Final Fantasy game that lets me really live the class that I love the most, which is Dragoon. In an MMO setting, which I really enjoy. And if I'm gonna go with my number 1, I'm just gonna say pretty much the Phantasy Star Online, grouping, not just PSO, all of the PS games. So PSO, PSU, PSO2.
What about PSE?
A lot of it is. You mean the portables? Those weren't MMOs. Oh, you mean PS0 on DS?
Yes.
Ugh, that game was god awful.
That game was god awesome. Better than PSU.
No.
PSU.
Not a chance. PSU was fantastic.
Hell. You fighting words.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Honestly, the PSO genre in general, just PSO, PSO2, PSU, I think were probably my 3. I still play PSO2. I love the hell out of PSO2.
I just had to recently update it.
I mean, that and the fact that PSO2 actually has a subscription system that actually works, because it's not mandatory, but it adds so much additional content to the game when you have it, because it gives you the room, it gives you extra crafting, it gives you the ability to actually have a player-based shop, so you can actually sell your items to other players, which is also a big boost. But it's not necessary for you to actually play the game. You can get 13 stars through collection file. You can get 13 stars by doing tacos and buying them from other players. So it's you're not limited to be able to play the game at its maximum potential. You can solo the game. You can play with 4 players. You can play with 8 players. You can play with 12 players. Depends on what you're doing. It's really nice. Out of that, if I were to give honorable mentions, there's at least 2 that I want to honorably mention. Grando Espada, because I love the fact that it's 3-player. Your
3 characters that you control.
Your 3 characters that you all control, and they each have their own individual combat set, which I thought was fantastic for its time.
But it was overly complicated, I will say.
No.
Oh, yeah.
When you really got into it, it was very simple. In fact, you could actually cross-bind your keys so that certain abilities would happen at the same time across all 3 of your characters.
At the same time, you have multiple stances with every character. And on top of that, yeah.
But in that vein, I think that complexity actually added to the gameplay immensely. Had it not been for that, the game would have been boring.
Well, And it was also super grindy as hell. I mean, there literally is
It's a Korean MMO, of course it's grindy.
Well, I mean, like, in the sense that you just stand there trying to recover health or whatever, and you're constantly being attacked by just some randomly spawning enemy that just shows up right next to you.
Yeah, but there were safe rooms, so you just had to move to a safe room to heal. It wasn't that hard. Anyway, and then my second honorable mention is WildStar. I love the WildStar for what it was. I thought that the idea behind having a relatively decent both cross mix of both fantasy and science fiction was actually a good, well put together, except for the fact that they just didn't think it through enough. And that's just an NCSoft problem. Like I said, NCSoft and I have always had quips. We've always had problems. Guild Wars has its fair share. Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 has its fair shares of things. I'll still play GW2 every once in a while. It's just a damn shame that WildStar had a really solid amount of potential, and they kind of shit on it. So it's like, it's a good game outside of the fact that there's some glaring flaws in the story and the combat. But outside of that, I think that the game probably could have done a lot better had it not been NCSoft.
All right, Mark, I'm sure you don't have that many MMOs you want to name off, but go right ahead.
I would put 14 at the top of the list just because it's the game that still continues to bring me back to the MMO genre, concept, etc. at this point. It's still a lot of fun to play. It's still very mechanically robust. It's still structured very well. It's just a really good piece of equipment as far as games go, and I definitely think it's one of the very best available on the market today, period. Final Fantasy XI probably takes second place just because I devoted like 3 months real time of my life to playing the goddamn thing. I would not go back to it now because of how onerous it is at this point, but for what it was at the time, I feel like it was pretty damn good. It took the idea of EverQuest and made it decidedly Square Enix, and I just feel like that's really neat conceptually. Ragnarok Online is probably the third place entry. I gave up on it not too long after it went into like proper paid status, but for like that first year when it was like in beta, I beat the shit out of that game and thought it was an astonishingly good piece of work for what it was. It's not something that would have ever convinced me to pay money for it on a month-to-month basis, but I did think it was really neat and interesting for what it was, and that's not nothing. City of Heroes is probably fourth just because I didn't invest a shitload of time in it, but I really loved what it was trying to do when it was trying to do that way back in the day. I thought it was an interesting experience. I did like the fact that they eventually added in the City of Villains. I don't know what you would call it, expansion / option for players. I thought that was just a really neat idea. And it's one of those games that I expected would hang around longer than it did, all things considered. And for fifth place, I'll go with not necessarily like a full-on MMORPG, but just an MMO in general, with PSO. Just because it's one of the first that I played, and I just loved the experience. Even though, like, once I got into it like really hard later, I played it mostly offline with local co-op with friends, more so than playing it online. But I still just really thought PSO was way ahead of its time.
Totally.
All right. For me, I would say number one would have to be Phantasy Star Online. I don't think there's any game out there that even remotely comes close to touching the amount of time I've spent on that game the last 18 years. Over a few thousand hours across multiple platforms and private servers. And the fact that, I don't know why, but I keep coming back to that game. Even after when I think I'm done, I just come back. In fact, last year I spent almost an entire year playing it with a friend who's never played it before in his entire life, and he loves the game now, and he wants to go back and play it some more after we just took a break from it. Phantasy Star Online in general as an experience when I first played it was just, one of those experiences that you might want to erase from your brain just so you can experience it again, because just how great it was. Like you said, Mark, it was definitely ahead of its time in regards to what it did in terms of bringing online gaming to consoles. The experience of being able to communicate with anybody around the world, thanks to a nice little translation system that Sega developed. So, like, if I wanted to partner up with a bunch of Japanese players, well, they gave us the tools in order to, communicate, which was really great. And on top of that, just the gameplay in general. Well, by today's standards, is probably kind of slow-paced and just super grindy and boring to some people. It was invigorating, and it was just a lot of fun, and to me, it still is to this day. For my second game, I will probably have to go with Terra. This is definitely the style of game I prefer, an action MMORPG where one of the things that pissed me off and why I never could get into WoW, besides the fact that I, just found the world too huge and boring, was the combat. And I did not like the fact that, say I'm running away from a skeleton. I could be 35,000 yards away from him. He's still attacking me and dealing damage. And I just found that to be completely ludicrous. And in Terra, I'm able to, react to enemies' attacks. I can dodge them. I can evade them. I can just, use strategy to actually beat them and not just run in there and beat the shit out of them, because if you do that, you will get your ass pummeled by most enemies later on in the game. I loved the fact that the game was so solo-friendly, and that's what hooked me on. And I was able to, find friends, and even bring some of my friends along for the ride to enjoy it. To this day, I mean, I have it on PC. I played it for the last 6 years. 6 years that it's been out on PC, and when it came out on PS4 and Xbox One, I have been playing it like almost nonstop again. It's the game that took me away from Monster Hunter World. Let's put it that way. For my third game, I'll go Star Trek Online, because it's sci-fi and I love Star Trek. What the hell? I had a lot of fun. It's the first game where I think I actually hit max level in any MMORPG. I made it to the highest rank Admiral in that game. I actually think it's also the first game where I actually, bought stuff from the online shop. I do know I had to buy parts in order to get myself a I forget the class of the ship, but it was the one that splits into 3, and I don't know why I'm having a brain fart about it, but that was fucking awesome. And the fact that they had a really unique, ship-to-ship combat system, PvP system. Later on in the game, they started to adjust it in a sense that, made it actually feel more like Star Trek, where it wasn't just a combat simulator, whether you're on planets or you're on in your ship. You actually could do diplomatic missions, you actually do research missions, stuff like that. You got to encounter Q. That was a lot of fun. Voiced by, John Delane. Man, I'm getting tired, so I'm starting to screw up my words. And you had a bunch of other, members of the Star Trek, acting universe, taking part in the show, which was great. I mean, this was the last thing that Leonard Nimoy was involved in regards to Star Trek, besides Star Trek 2. Or Star Trek, what was the name of the second Star Trek movie? With the second Star Trek Abrams movie. Screw it. So my fourth game, because I'm going to try and hurry this along, because I'm sure people don't really care too much about what I have to say. I would probably have to go with... Crap. I'll probably have to go with... It's on the top of my tongue, and I keep playing it too. It's... I would just say Black Desert Online. It's the one that I'm currently playing with a friend right now. And to me, it's a weird game in a sense that it has the same type of, action-oriented combat as Terra. But it is, yes, Into Darkness. Thank you very much. I don't know why I was having a brain fart. I'm having a lot of brain farts tonight, people. I'm very sorry about that. But Black Desert Online is a really fun and unique game. I love how its story ties in with the main quests. of the game that, for quest progression. I love the characters. I love, for Korean MMOs, this is probably one of the best character creation systems I've seen. Just very fun and unique. The combat is a lot of fun as well. You got a lot of unique classes, so it doesn't feel like you're playing, like a generic MMORPG for me. Very unique and fun. And the music is actually pretty good too. That's something I normally pay attention to, and Jan's camera just disappeared.
My cat decided it would be an awesome idea to be up behind where my camera's at, and then try to jump down on my computer, and in doing so, knock my camera over and turn my computer off.
Oh no! Oh no! Come back,
Does my
Jan.
camera still work?
There you
Hey,
go.
it still works. It didn't break. I'm so happy.
Yay!
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Anyway,
And I'm trying to think of my last MMORPG. I'm trying I would have to definitely say it's not a game that's currently being supported anymore. My last game is Warhammer Online: Age of Reckoning. I mean, I've talked about it numerous times already before. I love the realm versus realm combat. I loved the aesthetic style of the game. I loved how much lore was packed into the game. That's not something you can really say about most other MMORPGs. I mean, World of Warcraft, I mean, you got the boys at Blizzard, hammering it home real hard, with the amount of lore they put into all their games. Even something as, small as the first Diablo game has a shitload of lore to it. World of Warcraft, I mean, Warhammer Online has a ton of lore backed into it based just off of the little miniature game itself and some novels and all that, and then they try to cram as much of that into the game as they possibly can. So it's kind of fun when you visit areas that that you recognize from the novels that you've read, or you go against some of these factions, and it was just a lot of fun. It was also the first game I actually was a part of a guild in as well, so it was very memorable in that sense that I actually got to be involved with a group of people that I didn't know, and I forced myself to try and get to know. So try and break out of my little shell there and break out of my comfort zone and be a social butterfly. For honorable mentions, I'll just go with one, and that's Elder Scrolls Online. That was probably the one game I really wanted to mention that could be my number 4. But Elder Scrolls Online is a game that I don't play as often as I should. I like it a lot. The game keeps getting better every time I play it. And the fact that I know you're not a fan, Jan, but I'm a big fan of the Elder Scrolls universe. And this game just does it for me in so many ways, and that I love it. And I just can't wait for any more future expansions because, yay! So now I turn the reins back over to you.
well, I think that's pretty much it, honestly. I think that getting a chance to actually talk about MMOs is nice, and I like being able to sort of just explore the genre with other people, mostly just because, like I said, for me, MMOs is, in a general sense, have always been sort of like my bread and butter when it comes to gaming. So, like, that's really where I met a lot of my friends and where I've met a lot of people like my roommates. So it's nice to be able to get into a game style and into a genre that really allows me to still be able to not just be myself, but to also be what it is that's on the screen and still have fun with it at the same time. And I think that I'm both happy and worried as to what's going to happen next with MMOs, simply just because of just sort of where the genre is now and where the genre is kind of heading. And so it'll be interesting to see. I'm still going to ride the wave. I'm still going to keep going with it just to see where it ends up. But as it is right now, I'm happy with what I've got, and I'm going to keep playing what I've got just because that's where a lot of my friends are, and I'd like to be able to keep those friends and maybe move on with the new games when they come out.
Any any of the newer MMORPGs that have you tried recently? Like, have you tried Revelations Online? Have you tried Lotus War Online? Have you tried Tree of Savior?
I tried Revelation. It was kind of I tried Bless, but I played Bless before it came to the States, so it was like...
Yeah. I'm waiting to play Bless, but I'm not going to pay for the $30 starter pack that they're asking for as
Bless
an early
is
access
weird.
game.
Yeah, Bless is weird. Honestly, the only more recent MMO that I actually got a kick out of was BDO. But again, I played the Asian freemium version rather than the buy-to-play version that they released in the States. So I enjoyed the time I had with BDO for the first year and a half. I loved the PvP in it. I thought the PvP in BDO was probably the first time I'd actually had a lot of fun in an MMO in PvP. But outside of that, I don't know. I kind of fell out of really keeping track of MMOs over the last couple of years, so I honestly don't really know a lot about a lot of the newer ones that are supposed to be coming out. I probably should do some homework and try to get back into seeing what more MMOs are all about and seeing if there's anything that actually gets me hyped. But as it is right now, I'm actually getting back into just like a lot of more single player stuff. I've been replaying back through Valkyrie Profile just because that's kind of like my jam. That's like my favorite RPG of all time. And I just picked up Shining Refrain, so I'll get a chance to play that tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that
I got
one.
that coming in the mail
I've always
tomorrow.
been a much larger fan of the Shining series over the Tales of series personally. So like when a lot of people are like, "Well, have you played Tales of?" It's like, I like the concept of the genre because it meshes the style of combat that I enjoyed from Valkyrie Profile. It's just that for some reason I like the characters and the story in the Shining series over the Tales of series. But that's just me personally.
Okay. Do you want to end the episode with anything?
Other than I'm probably changing streaming times just because of my new work schedule. Not really. I'll have that updated on Twitter here next week. So.
Anything happening in the future for you, Mark? You gonna try to do any more board game streams?
Maybe in the next couple of weeks. I don't know 100% for certain yet when I will be doing one, but I would like to do another one in a few weeks. I might try to do some gaming streams in the next few weeks, but I don't know for certain yet. Like, stuff's kind of up in the air right now.
Okay. I don't really have anything special going on tomorrow. I'm doing another game jam with my buddy Lance. We're going to be continuing to play Doom WADs that, were created throughout the years. Wednesday, we're going to be a man short, so we're not going to have a full 3 vets and a noob thing going on, so we're going to try and figure out what we're going to play. We just concluded Borderlands 2, so we're going to see what we're up to, but both of those days we'll start streaming at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Outside of that, I don't think there's really anything else that's going on for me. We are going to do, in order to keep up with the schedule, because last week was when this episode was supposed to take place. Unfortunately, life happens, work happens, but we are going to keep with our schedule, so we're going to do, for the first time in a while, a back-to-back GVN Live, which will be next Monday, unless you guys don't feel absolutely comfortable about that. We can talk about that after the show. And on the July 30th episode, we have a special guest who is going to be Jeff Tarzia of Smash JT, a YouTuber who reports on, pretty much gaming news and whatnot. And he recently has been doing this really huge undercover, investigation into the Atari VCS. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about that and what he does for a living as a YouTuber. So outside of that, there's really nothing else, and you know what? I feel like rating somebody. Let's see who I can raid tonight. Unfortunately, Mr. Pure Instinct is hosting us, which I appreciate, but it's a shame that I can't raid him this time.
Let me take a quick peek to see if there's anyone I know that might be on. I don't think so.
I'm having a little bit of trouble. Okay, there we go. Because I was having problems loading up my following page on Twitch. I was thinking about going to this. Oh, okay. We're going to raid my friend Mr. Kelphelp, who is the noob of our 3 Vets and a Noob show.
Okay.
So,
I guess that's fine.
He's going to enjoy this nice little burst. He's a fun little guy. You'll enjoy him. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. You guys... Oh, wait. There's a problem with the raid. Wait. What? I guess we're not doing this just yet. I guess Twitch is probably having some problems. Let's try this again.
Or it could be that they have raids turned off. Who knows?
Oh.
That could be it.
That could be a problem. Or maybe I'm just not entering his thing right. Oh, he's actually about to end his stream anyway. He just beat BioShock Infinite.
That might be why.
Yeah. Yeah, he might be ending his stream soon. Let's try my buddy Ice then. The gentleman who plays Terra on console. He's probably doing some raids. And yeah, they're not letting me raid, so I'm just gonna end the night. Everybody, Jan, thank you for
Robert,
yes.
Robert.
Yes.
Jan has somebody that you would like to raid. Why
If
don't
it
you
works,
ask her?
It's fine. The raids are actually down.
The raids
and there's
aren't working, so otherwise I
raids
would
are
have asked
down.
her.
That's what I was just about to say. Raids are down, and there's issues loading panels on pages right now. It's a known Twitch issue, so no worries. Next time.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So-
Fishhook, I'll definitely look into
You
him
would
later.
think- Yeah, Fishhook FPC, my boy Mark.
Okay. All right. With that, Jan, thank you for hosting very much. Yeah. Can we just do a host? Yeah, we can do a host. Is it just Fishhook?
Fishhook FPC.
FPC. Okay. All right. Jan, thank you for hosting. Mark, thank you for being here as always. Everybody, you have yourself a wonderful night.
Night night.